Part 6 of Childe Christopher and Goldilind the Fair by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 20 of the Wedding of Christopher and Goldilind. Early on the morrow came the Earl unto Goldilind, and she received him gladly, as one who had fashioned life anew for her. And when he had sat down by her, he spake and said, Lady, thou cravest of me yesterday 2 things. The first was freedom from the captivity of Greenharbour, and the second life and liberty for the varlet that cherished thee in the wildwood the other day. Now thy first asking grieved me, for that thou hast been tyrannously done by, and thy second I wondered at. But since I have seen the young man, I wonder the less, for he is both so goodly and so mighty of body, and of speech bold and free, yet gentle and of all courtesy, that he is meet to be knight or earl, yea, or very king. Now therefore, in both these matters I will do well to thy pleasure, and in one way it may be. And thou mayst then go forth from Greenharbour as free as a bird, and thy varlet's life may be given unto him, and mickle honour therewith. Art thou then willing to do after my rede and my commandment, so that both these good things may betide thee?
Right willing am I, she said, to be free and happy, and to save the life of a fair youth and kind.
Then said he, there is one thing for thee to do, that this day thou wed this fair and kind youth, and let him lead thee forth from Greenharbour, and belike he will bring thee to no ill stead, for his friends are mightier than may happen thou deemest.
She turned as red as blood at his word. She knit her brows, and her eyes flashed as she answered, Is it seemly for a king's daughter to wed a nameless churl? And now I know thee, Lord Earl, what thou wouldst do. Thou wouldst be king of Medem, and put thy master's daughter to the road.
And she was exceeding wroth. But he said, smiling somewhat, Was it then seemly for the king's daughter to kneel for this man's life, and to go near swooning for joy when it was granted to her?
Yea, she said, for I love him with all my body and soul, and I would have had him love me par amour, and then should I have been his mistress, and he my servant. But now shall he be my master, and I his servant.
And still was she very wroth. Quoth the Earl, As to the matter of my being king of Medem, that will I be whatever befall, or die in the place else. So if thou wilt not do my rede, then must the varlet whom thou lovest die, and at Greenharbour must thou abide with Dame Eleanor. There is no help for it.
She shrieked out at that word of his, and well nigh swooned, lying back in her chair, but presently fell a-weeping sorely.
But the Earl said, Hearken, my lady, I am not without warrant to do this. Tell me, hast thou ever seen any fairer or doughtier than this youngling?
Never, said she.
So say we all, he said. Now I shall tell thee, and I can bring witness to it, that in his last hour the king thy father, when he gave thee into my keeping, spake also this, that I should wed thee to none save the fairest and doughtiest man that might be found. Even so would I do now. What then sayest thou?
She answered not, but still wept somewhat. Then said the Earl,
Lady, give me leave, and I shall send thy women to thee, and sit in the great hall for an hour, and within that while thou send a woman of thine to say one word, yes, unto me, then all is well. But if not, then do I depart from Greenharbour straightway, and take the youngling with me to hang him up on the first tree. Be wise, I pray thee.
And therewith he went his ways. But Goldilind, being left alone a little, rose up and paced the chamber to and fro, and her tears and sobbing ceased, and a great and strange joy grew up in her heart, mingled with the pain of longing, so that she might rest in no wise. Even therewith the door opened, and her women entered, Aloise first, and she called to her at once, and bade her to find Earl Geoffrey in the great hall, and say to him, Yes. So Aloise went her ways, and Goldilind bade her other women to array her in the best and goodliest wise that they might, and the day was yet somewhat young. Now it must be said of Earl Geoffrey, that in spite of his hard word, he had it not in his heart either to slay Christopher
or to leave Goldilind at Green Harbour to the mercy of Dame Eleanor. Chapter 21. Of the wedding of those twain. Now were folk gathered in the hall, and the Earl Geoffrey was standing on the dais by the high seat, and beside him a worthy clerk, the Abbot of Medhamstead, a monk of St. Benedict, and next to him the Burgreave of Green Harbour, and then a score of knights, all in brave raiment, and squires withal, and sergeants. But down in the hall were the men-at-arms and serving-men, and 100 of folk of the countryside, queens as well as carles, who had been gathered for the show and bidden in. No other women were there in the hall till Goldilind and her serving-women entered. She went straight up the hall and took her place in the high seat, and for all that her eyes seemed steady, she had noted Christopher standing by the shot-window just below the dais. Now when she was set down, and there was silence in the hall, Earl Geoffrey came forth and said, "Lords and knights, and ye good people, the Lady Goldilind, daughter of the Lord King Roland that last was, is now of age to wed. And be it known unto you, that the King, her father, bade me, in the last words by him spoken, to wed her to none but the loveliest and strongest that might be, as witness I can bring hereto. Now such a man have I sought hereto in Medhamstead, and the much peopled land of Medham, and none have I come on, however worthy he were of deeds or well born of lineage, but that I doubted me if he were so fair or so doughty as might be found. But here in this half-desert corner of the land have I gotten a man than whom none is doughtier, as some of you have found to your cost. And tell me, all you, where have ye seen any as fair as this man?" And therewith he made a sign with his hand, and forth strode Christopher up unto the dais, and he was so clad that his kirtle was of white samite, girt with a girdle of goldsmith's work, whereby hung a good sword of like fashion, and over his shoulders was a mantle of red cloth of gold, furred with ermine and lined with green sendal, and on his golden curled locks sat a chaplet of pearls. Then to the lords and all the people he seemed so fair and fearless and kind, that they gave a great shout of welcome, and Goldilind came forth from her chair, as fair as a June lily, and came to Christopher and reached out her hand to him. But he refrained him a moment, so that all they could see how sweet and lovely a hand it was. And then he took it, and drew her to him, and kissed her mouth before them all, and still he held her hand, till the Abbot of Medhamstead, aforetold, came and stood by them and blessed them. Then spake the Earl again, "Lo ye, here hath been due betrothal of these twain, and ye may see how meet they be for each other in goodliness and kindness. Now there lacketh naught but they should be wedded straightway, and all is arrayed in the chapel, wherefore if this holy man will come with us, and do on his mass-hackle, our joy shall be fulfilled. Save that thereafter shall feast and merriment await all you in this hall, and we shall be there to welcome all comers in this house of Green Harbour, whereas this our gracious lady has long abided so happily." Man looked on man here and there, and smiled a little as he spake, but none said aught, for there were none save the Earl's servants there, and a sort of poor wretches. So therewithal they went their ways to the chapel, where was the wedding done as grandly as might be, considering they were in no grander place than Green Harbour. And when all was done, and folk began to flow away from the chapel, and Goldilind sat shamed-faced but strangely happy in a great stall of the choir, the Earl called Christopher unto him, and said, "My lad, I deem that some great fortune shall betide thee, since already thou hast begun so luckily. But I beseech thee, mar not thy fortune by coming back with thy fair wife to the land of Medham, or else it may be thou shalt cast thy life away, and that will bring her sorrow, as I can see well." He spake this grimly, though he smiled as he spake, but he went on more gently. "I will not send you twain away empty-handed. When ye go out agates into the wide world, ye shall find 2 fair horses for your riding,
well bedight, and one with a woman's saddle, and moreover a sumpter beast, not very lightly burdened, for on one side of him he beareth a chest, wherein is, first of all, the raiment of my lady, and beneath it some deal of silver and gold and gems. But on the other side is victual and drink for the way for you, and raiment for thee, youngling. How sayest thou? Is it well?" "It is well, lord," said Christopher. "Yet would I have with me the raiment wherewith I came hither, and my bow and my sax." "Yea, and wherefore, carle?" said Earl Geoffrey. Said the youngling, "We be going to ride the wildwood, and it might be better for safety's sake that I be so clad as certain folk look to see men ride there." But he reddened as he spake, and the Earl said, "By all hallows, but it is not ill thought of, and belike the same like kind of attire might be better to hide the queenship of the lady from the wood folk than that which she now weareth." "True is that, lord," quoth Christopher. "Yet," said the Earl, "I will have you go forth from the castle clad in your lordly weed, lest folk of mine say that I have stripped my lady and cast her forth. Don ye your poor raiment when in the wood ye be." Therewith he called to a squire, and bade him seek out that poor raiment of the new-wedded youngling, and bow withal, and shafts good store, and do all on the sumpter. And furthermore he bade him tell one of my lady's women to set on the sumpter some of Goldilind's old and used raiment. So the squire did the Earl's will, and both got Christopher's gear, and also found Aloise, and gave her the Earl's word. She smiled thereat, and went straightway and fetched the very same raiment, green gown and all, which she had brought to Goldilind in prison that other day, and in which Goldilind had fled from Green Harbour. And when she had done them in the chest above all the other gear, she stood yet beside the horses amidst of the varlets and squires who were gathered there to see the new-wedded folk depart. Presently then came forth through the gate these two, hand in hand, and Earl Geoffrey with them. And he set Goldilind on her horse himself, and knelt before her to say farewell, and therewith was Christopher on his horse, and him the Earl saluted debonairly. But just as they were about shaking their reins to depart, Aloise fell down on her knees before the Earl, who said, "What is toward, woman?" "A grace, my lord, a grace," said she. "Stand up on thy feet," said the Earl, "and ye, my masters, draw out of earshot." Even so did they, and the Earl bade her speak, and she said, "Lord, my lady is going away from Green Harbour, and anon thou wilt be going, and I shall be left with the sleek she-devil yonder that thou hast set over us. And here there will be hell for me without escape, now that my lady is gone. Wherefore I pray thee, take me with thee to Medhamstead, even if it be to prison, for here I shall die the worst of deaths." Earl Geoffrey smiled on her sourly, and said, "If it be as I understand, that thou hast lifted thine hand against my lady, wert thou wending with me, thou shouldst go just so far as the first tree. Thou mayst deem thyself lucky if I leave thee behind here, nor needest thou trouble thee concerning Dame Eleanor. Little more shalt thou hear of her henceforward." But Goldilind spake and said, "My lord Earl, I would ask grace for this one, for what she did to me she did compelled, and not of her free will, and I forgive it her. And moreover, this last time she suffered in her body for the helping of me, so if thou mightest do her asking, I were the better pleased." "It shall be as thou wilt, my lady," said the Earl, "and I will have her with me, and keep her quiet in Medhamstead. But by all hallows, had it not been for thy word, we would have had her whipped into the wildwood, and hanged up unto a tree thereafter." Then Aloise knelt before Goldilind, and kissed her feet, and wept, and drew back pale and trembling. But Goldilind shook her rein once for all now, and her apple-grey horse went forth with her. Christopher came after, leading the sumpter beast, and forth they went, and passed over the open green about the castle, and came on to the woodland way whereby Goldilind had fled that other time. Chapter 22 of the Woodland Bride-Chamber. They rode in silence a good way, and it was some 3 hours after noon,
and the day as fair and bright as might be. Christopher held his peace for sweet shame that he was alone with a most fair maid, and she his own, and without defence against him. But she amidst of her silence turned, now red, and now somewhat pale, and now and again she looked somewhat askance on him, and he deemed her looks were no kinder than they should be. At last she spake, yet not looking on him, and said, So, Forester, now is done what I must needs do. Thy life is saved, and I am quit of Green Harbour and its prison and its torments. Whither away then? Quoth he, all dismayed, for her voice was the voice of anger, I wot not whither, save to the house thou hast blessed already with thy dear body. At that word she turned quite pale and trembled, and spake not for a while, and smote her horse and hastened on the way, and he after her. But when he was come up with her again, then she said, still not looking at him, A house of woodmen and wolf-heads, is that a meet dwelling place for me? Didst thou hear men at Green Harbour say that I am a queen? Hear them I did, quoth he, but meseemeth naught like a queen had they done with thee. She said, And dost thou mock me with that, thou? And she burst out weeping. He answered not, for sore grief smote him, remembering her hand in his but a little while ago, and again she hurried on, and he followed her. When he came up with her, she said, And thou, didst thou woo me as a queen? Lady, he said, I wooed thee not at all. I was given to thee, would I not? Great joy was that to me. Then said she, Thou sayest sooth, thou hast not wooed me, but taken me. She laughed therewith as one in bitterness, but presently she turned to him, and he wondered, for in her face was longing and kindness naught like to her words. But he durst not speak to her lest he should anger her, and she turned her face from him again, and she said, Wert thou given to me? Meseems I was given to thee, would I not? The queen to the churl, the woodman, the wolf-head. And again she rode on, and he followed, sick at heart, and wondering sorely. When they were riding together again, they spake not to each other, though she stole glances at him to see how he fared. But he rode on with knit brows and a stern countenance. So in a while she began to speak to him again, but as if there were naught but courtesy between them, and neither love nor hatred. She fell to asking him of woodland matters, concerning bird and beast and things creeping, and at first he would scarce answer her at all, and then were his answers short. But at last, despite of all, he began to forget both grief and anger, so much the sweetness of her speech wound about his heart. And withal she fell to asking him of his fellows and their life in the woods, and of Jack of the Toffs and the like. And now he answered her questions fully, and while she laughed at his words, and he laughed also, and all pleasure had there been of this converse, if he had not beheld her from time to time, and longed for the fairness of her body, and feared her wrath at his longing. So wore the day, and the sun was getting low, and they were come to another woodland pool, which was fed by a clear running little brook, and up from it went a low bank of greensward, exceeding sweet, and beyond that oak trees wide branched and great, and still fair greensward beneath them, and hazel thickets beyond them. There then Goldilind reined up and looked about her, but Christopher looked on her and naught else. But she said, Let tomorrow bring counsel. But now I am weary to-night, and if we are not to ride night long, we shall belike find no better place to rest in. Wilt thou keep watch while I sleep? Yea, he said, bowing his head to her soberly, and therewith he got off his horse and would have helped her down from hers, but she slipped lightly down and stood before him face to face, and they were very nigh to each other, she standing close to her horse. Her face was pale to his deeming, and there was a piteous look in her eyes, so that he yearned towards her in his bowels, and reached his hand toward her. But she shrank aback, leaning against her horse, and said in a trembling voice, looking full at him, and growing yet paler, Forester, dost thou think it seemly that thou shouldst ride with us? Thou, such as thou hast told thyself to be,
in this lordly raiment, which they gave thee yonder as part of the price for thy leading us away into the wildwood?"
"Lady," said he, "whether it be seemly or not, I see that it is thy will that I should go clad as a woodland churl. Abide a little, and thy will shall be done." Therewith he did off the burden from the sumpter horse, and set the chests on the earth, and then he took her horse gently, and led him with the other two in under the oak trees. And there he tethered them so that they could bite the grass, and came back thereafter, and took his old raiment out of the chest, and said, "What thou wilt have me do I will do now, and this all the more as to-morrow I should have done it unbidden, and should have prayed thee to do on garments less glorious than now thou bearest, so that we may look the less strange in the woodland if we chance to fall in with any man." Nought she answered as he turned toward the hazel copse. She had been following him with her eyes while he was about that business, and when his back was turned, she stood a moment till her bosom fell a-heaving, and she wept. Then she turned her about to the chest wherein was her raiment, and went hastily and did off her glorious array, and did on the green gown wherewith she had fled, and left her feet bare withal. Then she looked up and saw Christopher, how he was coming out from the hazel thicket new clad in his old raiment, and she cried out aloud and ran toward him. But he doubted that some evil had betid, and that she was chased, so he drew out his sword. But she ran up to him and cried out, "Put up thy sword, here is none save me." But he stood still, gazing on her in wonderment, and now she was drawn near to him she stood still before him panting. Then he said, "Nay, lady, for this night there was no need of thy disguising thee. To-morrow it had been soon enough." She said, "I were fain if thou wouldst take my hand and lead me back to our resting place." Even so he did, and as their palms met he felt how her hand loved him, and a flood of sweetness swept over his heart and made an end of all its soreness. But he led her quietly back again to their place. Then she turned to him and said, "Now art thou the woodland god again, and the courtier no more, so now will I worship thee." And she knelt down before him, and embraced his knees and kissed them. But he drew her up to him, and cast his arms about her, and kissed her face many times, and said, "Now art thou the poor captive again." She said, "Now hast thou forgiven me, but I will tell thee that my wilfulness and folly was not all utterly feigned, though when I was about it I longed for thee to break it down with the fierceness of a man, and bid me to look to it how helpless I was, and thou how strong and my only defence. Not utterly feigned it was, for I will say it, that I was grieved to the heart when I bethought me of Medhamstead and the seat of my fathers. What sayest thou then? Shalt thou ever be a woodman in these thickets, and a follower of Jack of the Toffs? If so thou wilt, it is well." He took her by the shoulders and bent her backwards to kiss her, and held her up above the earth in his arms, waving her this way and that, till she felt how little and light she was in his grasp, though she was no puny woman. Then he set her on her feet again, and laughed in her face, and said, "Sweetling, let to-morrow bring counsel, but let it all be. Thou hast said it, thou art weary, so now will I dight thee a bed of our mantles, and thou shalt lie thee down, and I shall watch thee as thou badest me." Therewith he went about and plucked armfuls of the young bracken, and made a bed wide and soft, and spread the mantles thereover. But she stood a while looking on him, then she said, "Dost thou think to punish me for my wilful folly, and to shame me by making me speak to thee?" "Nay," he said, "it is not so." She said, "I am not shamed in that I say to thee, if thou watch this night, I will watch by thee, and if I lie down to rest this night, thou shalt lie by me. For my foemen have given me to thee, and now shalt thou give thyself to me." So he drew near to her shyly, like unto one who hath been forgiven, and there was their bridal bed, and naught but the oak boughs betwixt them and the bare heavens. Chapter 23. They fall in with friends. Now awoke Goldilind when the morning was young and fresh, and she drew the mantle up over her shoulders, and as she did so, but half awake, she deemed she heard other sounds than the singing of the blackbirds and throstles about the edge of the thicket, and she turned her eyes toward the oak trees and the hazel thicket, and saw at once 3 of mankind coming on foot over the greensward toward her. She was afraid, so that she durst not put out a hand to awaken Christopher, but sat gazing on those 3 as they came toward her. She saw that 2 were tall men, clad much as Christopher, but presently she saw that there was a woman with them, and she took heart somewhat thereat, and she noted that one of the men was short-haired and dark-haired, and the other had long red hair falling about his shoulders, and as she put out her hand and laid it on Christopher's shoulder, the red-haired one looked toward her a moment under the sharp of his hand, for the sun was on their side, and then set off running, giving out a great whoop therewithal. Even therewith leapt up Christopher, still half awake, and the red-haired man ran right up to him and caught him by the shoulders and kissed him on both cheeks, so that Goldilind saw that these were the fellows whereof Christopher had told, and she stood there shamefast and smiling. Presently came up the others, to wit, Gilbert and Joanna, and they also kissed and embraced Christopher, and all they were as full of joy as might be. Then came Joanna to Goldilind and said, I wot not who this may be, brother, yet meseems she will be some one who is dear to thee, wherefore is she my sister? And therewith she kissed Goldilind, and she was kind and sweet of flesh and goodly of body, and Goldilind rejoiced in her. Joanna made much of her, and said to her, Here is to do, whereas 2 men have broken into a lady's chamber. Come, sister, let us to the thicket, and I will be thy tiring maid, and while these others tell their tales, we shall tell ours. And she took her hand, and they went into the hazels. But the 2 new-come men seemed to find it hard to keep their eyes off Goldilind till the hazels had hidden her. Then turned David to Christopher and said, Thy pardon, little king, that we have waked thee so early, but we wotted not that thou hast been among the woodwomen, and sooth to say, my lad, we had little ease till we found thee, after we came home and saw all those hoof-marks yonder. Yea, said Gilbert, if we had lost thee, we had been finely holpen up, for we could never have gone back to the Toffs, nor into the kingdom. For I think my father would have hanged us if we had come back with a, by the way, Christopher is slain. But tell us, lad, what hath befallen thee with yonder sweetening? Yea, tell us, said David, and sit down here betwixt us with thy back to the hazel thicket, and we shall get no tale out of thee. Tush, man, Joanna will bring her back, and that right soon, I hope. Christopher laughed and sat down between them, and told all how it had gone with him, and of Goldilind, who she was. The others hearkened heedfully, and Gilbert said, With aught thou hast told us, brother, it is clear we shall find it hard to dwell in Littledale. So soon as thy loveling hath rested her at our house, we must go our ways to the Toffs, and take counsel of our father. Christopher yea said this, and therewithal was come Joanna leading Goldilind duly arrayed, yet still in her green gown, for she would none other, fresh, blushing, and all lovely. And David and Christopher did obeisance before her, as to a great lady. But she hailed them as brothers merrily and kindly, and bade them kiss her, and they kissed her cheek, but shyly, and especially David. Thereafter they broke their fast under the oak trees, and spent a merry hour, and then departed, the 2 women riding the horses, the others afoot. So they came to the house of Littledale, some while before sunset, and were merry and glad there. Young they were, troubles were behind them, and many a joy before them. Chapter 24. They take counsel at Littledale. 10 days they abode in the house of Littledale in all good cheer, and Joanna led Goldilind here and there about the woods, and made much of her, so that the heart within her was full of joy, for the freedom of the wildwoods and all the life thereof was well nigh new to her, whereas on the day of her flight from Green Harbour, and on 2 other such times, deadly fear, as is aforesaid, was mingled with her joyance, and would have drowned it utterly, but for the wilfulness which hardened her heart against the punishment to come. but now she was indeed free, and it seemed to her, as to Christopher when he was but new healed of his hurt, as if all this bright beauty of tree and flower and beast and bird was but made for her alone, and she wondered that her fellow could be so calm and sedate amidst all of this pleasure. And now forsooth was her queenhood forgotten, and better to her seemed Christopher's valiant love, and the meeting in the hall of the eventide was so sweet to her that she might do little but stand trembling whilst Christopher came up to her, and Joanna's trim feet were speeding her over the floor to meet her man, that she might be a sharer in his deeds of the day. Many tales withal Joanna told the queen of the deeds of her husband and his kindred, and of the freeing of her and the other three from their captivity at Wailing Knowe, and of the evil days they wore there before the coming of their lads, which must have been worser by far, thought Goldilind, than the days of Green Harbour. So with all these tales and the happy days in the house of the Wildwoods, Goldilind now began to deem of this new life as if there had been none other fated for her, so much a part was she now become of the days of those woodmen and wolf-heads. But when the last of those 10 days was wearing to an end, and those 5 were sitting happy in the hall, albeit David sat somewhat pensive, now staring at Goldilind's beauty, now rising from his seat to pace the floor restlessly, Gilbert spake and said, "Brethren, and thou, Queen Goldilind, it may be that the time is drawing near for other deeds than letting fly a few shafts at the dun deer, and eating our meat and singing old songs as we lie at Our Lady's feet. For though we be at peace here in the wild wood, forgetting all things save those that are worthy to be remembered, yet in the cities and the courts of kings guile is not forgotten, and pride is alive, and tyranny, and the sword is whetted for innocent lives, and the feud is eked by the destruction of those who will be sackless of its upheaving. Wherefore it behoveth to defend us by the ready hand and the bold heart and the wise head. So I say, let us loiter here no longer, but go our ways to-morrow to the Toffs, and take the rede of our elders. How say ye, brethren?" Quoth Christopher, "Time was, brother, when what thou sayest would have been as a riddle to me, and I would have said, Here we are merry, though we be few. And if ye lack more company, let me ride to the Toffs and come back with 50 score of lads and lasses, and thus let us eke our mirth, and maybe they will tell us whitherward to ride. But now there is a change, since I have gained a gift over great for me, and I know that they shall be some of the great ones who would be eager to take it from me. And who knows what guile may be about the weaving even now, as on the day when thou first sawest this hall, beloved." Goldilind spake and sighed withal. "Whither my lord will lead me, thither I will go. But here is it fair and sweet and peaceful, neither do I look for it that men will come hither to seek the Queen of Medem." David said, "Bethink thee though, my lady, that he who wedded thee to the woodman may yet rue, and come hither to undo his deed by slaying the said woodman, and showing the Queen unto the folk." Goldilind turned pale, but Joanna spake. "Nay, brother David, why wilt thou prick her heart with this fear? For my part, I think that, chance hap apart, we might dwell here for years in all safety, and happily enough, maybe. Yet also I say that we of the Toffs may well be eager to show this jewel to our kindred, and especially to our father and mother of the Toffs. So to-morrow we will set about the business of carrying her thither, will she nill she?" And therewith she threw her arms about Goldilind, and clipped her and kissed her, and Goldilind reddened for pleasure and for joy that she was so sore prized by them all. End of Part 6.